So good afternoon. Welcome again. It's good to see such a good turnout for our discussion this afternoon. My name is Roger Mark D'Souza. I'm the Director of Population, Environmental Change and Security here at the Wilson Center. And I'm looking forward to this session this afternoon that focuses on integrated multi-sector approaches, what works and what's next. And we're going to hear from a panel of experts who have been working on a project called Balanced, which stands for Building Actors and Leaders for Advancing Community Excellence in Development. It has been a 5-year initiative that focuses on improving access to health services, especially family planning, secure livelihoods, and to help conserve critical biodiversity and natural resources upon which people depend. And you'll hear a little bit more about the project shortly. And this is a really good topic for us here at the Wilson Center. Those of you who know us well know that we very often work on the integration of these topics. And at the Wilson Center, we very much work towards bringing together the worlds of policy, practice, and academia to get a better sense of how they can inform each other. So this is very much consistent with that goal. This is part of our HELPS project, this event today, which stands for Health, Environment, Livelihoods, Population, and Security. And it's our 5-year initiative that is supported by USAID's Office of Population and Reproductive Health. So on that note, I'd like to thank USAID for its support of these programs on integrating these issues and invite USAID representative Matt Erdman to come and give us some remarks to get us started. And Matt is the Population, Health, and Environment Technical Advisor for USAID. So Matt?
Thank you, Roger Mark. It's an honor to be asked to give the opening remarks for this event, and it's great to see you all here. I'd like to start off with lots of familiar faces. I'd like to start off by saying thanks to the Wilson Center for hosting this event, and to the Balanced team for their hard work over the last 5 years, and to you all for coming here and actively participating in this dialogue on integrated multi-sector approaches. I'll start off with a brief overview of what we mean by multi-sector approaches, why USAID is interested in them, and describe the stepping stones that led to the formation of the Balanced project, and then ask you to think about where we should be going next. The multi-sector approaches that we will be focusing on today emphasize the connections between population, health, and environment, and are therefore often referred to as PHE. Now, I know many of you in this room have contributed greatly to this field, but for the benefit of those that aren't as familiar with it, I'll go into this background on it. So more than 1/5 of the world's population, about 1.4 billion people, live in ecological hotspots, areas that are rich in biodiversity and threatened by human activity. While these hotspots comprise just 12% of the planet's land surface, they hold nearly 20% of its human population and are typically characterized by little access to basic government services such as healthcare and education. Further, hotspot populations are growing nearly 40% faster than the world's population overall. PHE projects recognize and address the linkages between humans, their health, and the environment within which they live. And the key objectives of these projects are to simultaneously improve access to family planning and health services while helping communities to manage natural resources in ways that improve health and livelihoods, and also conserving the critical ecosystems on which they depend. The central hypothesis for integrating family planning, health, and natural resource management for conservation activities is that the synergies produced will make these interventions more effective and sustainable as compared to vertical, single sector interventions. Unmet demand for family planning is often quite high in remote rural areas, and in the biodiversity hotspots characterized by their high levels of threatened plants and animals found nowhere else, PHE interventions are especially relevant. So for those working in the health field, the PHE approach increases access to remote, underserved communities with a need for family planning and basic health services. And so by partnering with environmental organizations that often have ongoing projects and established relationships in these settings, integrated programs can more effectively reach these underserved populations. And paired with simultaneous strategies to improve natural resource management in these fragile ecosystems, the health and family planning empowers families and communities with an additional strategy for influencing the well-being of their families and environments. And so it's also hoped that with this approach, it will yield trust building and therefore additional environmental gain. The natural environment also benefits. Offering basic health services can dramatically reduce community morbidity and mortality and lessen dependence on natural resources for livelihoods. Also, family planning enables couples to achieve a desired family size, which has positive effects on health and well-being, while also potentially contributing to better natural resource management and conservation. And in the longer term, population pressures on local ecosystems are also reduced. So USAID's Office of Population and Reproductive Health has supported PHE initiatives since 1993, when the office partnered with the University of Michigan's Population and Environment Fellows Program to develop a cadre of professionals specializing in PHE issues. And I know we have several of those fellows with us today. Since then, the PHE program has expanded to include field programming in response to legislative language originally included in the fiscal year 2002 Foreign Operations Appropriations Act, and repeated in all subsequent appropriations acts, stating that under the Child Survival and Health Programs Fund, a portion of the funds for family planning and reproductive health should be allocated in areas where population growth threatens biodiversity or endangered species. The accompanying 2002 Managers Report also included language that urged USAID to develop performance goals and indicators which promote cross-sectoral collaboration on community-based population health environment programs. This legislative language gave momentum to USAID's PHE program, and over the last decade, 20 projects have worked in over 20 countries through this program, with funding focused on piloting field projects, providing technical leadership through developing research, tools, and communications, and building technical capacity through support to USAID's missions and cooperating agencies. Field project funds went to projects such as the Integrated Population and Coastal Resources Management Project, or IPOPCORM, which some people here were involved with, and the People and Environment Coexistence Development Project in the Philippines, as well as a number of conservation organizations such as Conservation International and World Wildlife Fund and the Jane Goodall Institute. Technical leadership funds went to organizations like the Population Reference Bureau and SIGE, the Philippines PHE Network, as well as the Woodrow Wilson Center's Environmental Change and Securities Program. This work served to demonstrate that conservation groups could expand access to family planning and reproductive health, meet other community needs, and still pursue conservation objectives. In 2007, the strategy moved from the demonstration phase into a more results-oriented phase. And the new USAID PHE strategic objective was to advance and support links between population, health, and environment sectors worldwide, with intended results similar to those of the framework for the Office of Population and Reproductive Health, namely global leadership demonstrated in influencing the worldwide PHE agenda and other organizations' programs, knowledge generated, communicated, and disseminated to improve understanding of population and environment linkages in new and primary audiences, and third, to support provided to the field to strengthen their institutional capacity to implement effective and sustainable PHE programs. The Balanced Project, the Building Actors and Leaders for the Advancement of Community Excellence and Development, grew out of this new direction and has done an excellent job in advancing and supporting the wider use of PHE through knowledge management, capacity building, and field implementation. I'll let them tell you all about that. So those are basically the steps that have gotten us to where we were when this project was created and to where we are today. And I'd really now like you guys to all think as you're listening to this presentation, and so that you can participate in the dialogue that will follow, and consider this a time to reflect on what's been done and on continuing to adapt and refine our strategies going forth. Right now, we in the Office of Population and Reproductive Health are in the process of revising and updating our population health environment strategy. And so this opportunity to get your input and feedback, your input onto that and your ideas would be really helpful. So challenge us, give us ideas, suggest new opportunities. And we really encourage your participation and look forward to hearing what you guys have to say about this after we've heard from the wonderful work that the Balanced team has done. So with that, thank you very much, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you very much, Matt. I like those closing comments. Challenge, ideas, new opportunities. So where are we going next, and sort of so what? I want to highlight some of the key points that Matt raised, some key words for me: synergies, effective, sustainable, integration, remote, underserved, partnering, paired with simultaneous strategies, trust building, desired family size, increased access to family planning, pressures reduced, performance goals and indicators, technical leadership tools, capacity, moving from a demonstration phase to results-oriented phase, and sort of leading us to the so what that we're going to talk about today and in this balanced report. And we're really working towards a discussion and a dialogue with you. So as we move towards that goal, I'm going to ask Linda Bruce, who's the director of the Balance Project, to say just a few words about Balanced, so you have a sense of what's the overall goals and objectives of this program. And from there, we'll start our dialogue. So Linda?
Shall I just stay here?
Yes.
Okay. Will you do the, thanks. Roger Mark, thank you very much. And Matt, you kind of stole my introduction, but I'm going to repeat it again. Many thanks to the Wilson Center for hosting this, for helping us to brainstorm how to put this together to be more than just about the Balance Project, but about the entire future for the PHE community. And we really do appreciate your thoughts and your questions and your dialogue about this. Thank you very much to all of the guests. I know you have lots to do today, lots of meetings, stimulating reports to write. So I really appreciate all of you being here with us to share these lessons learned and discuss a way forward. I would also really like to thank the USAID for their tremendous support. The Office of Population and Reproductive Health has generously funded the Balance Project, and without that, we couldn't have made these achievements or be here today. I would particularly like to give a shout out and a much great thanks to Liz Schoenecker, who was our former AOTR, TOR, whatever they're called these days, to Heather Dagnes, who was our previous PHE advisor, to Noni Hamilton, who is our current leader, AOR, and obviously to Matt, who's new on the team, and we really appreciate all of the sage guidance that everybody has given us. So I would like to thank so many people along the way, my team members in particular. It's been a virtual team, so it's sometimes been challenging to make sure we brainstorm as well as we could together, but I would also personally like to thank in public my team for hanging in there through the last 5 years. So thank you very much. The Balance Project is very quickly, as Matt mentioned, our goal, our objective. All right, I'll go back. No, that's fine. All right. No, you can go backward. Sorry. Thank you. As Matt mentioned, and I'll reinforce, the Balance Project is being implemented by University of Rhode Island's Coastal Resources Center, along with Path Foundation Philippines, located in Manila, and also with Conservation International. As Matt mentioned, our goal is advancing and supporting wider use of PHE approaches worldwide. We had 3 strategies for achieving that, just very quickly. Capacity building, which we'll talk a lot more about a little bit later. Knowledge management, how do we get the word out? How do we get new tools? How do we get the field to use it? And all these coming together in the field. And of course, we could not have brought them together in the field without also implementing some field activities. So we'll be talking about that today. So those were our three sort of key cornerstones of the project. The project achieved a lot. The details of those achievements will be out soon in our latest newsletter. You'll be getting it in your mailbox within a couple of days. If some of you are not members of the PHE listserv, and you're interested in the topic, I strongly advise you to sign up. And you can read a lot about the details of the Balance Project. Today we really want to highlight just key features that we thought are really important to to talk about what we did, to start this dialogue about what's next. And so what? Why even do this? I think that's an important question to ask. So at this point, I think I'm going to turn this over to Roger Mark for Elin.
Great.
Turn that off.
Thank you very much, Linda. So what? Why even do this? Why is this important? And very often we think about the impact that ultimately we're looking to have. So we wanted to start by telling a little bit of a story from the field and to hear about the communities directly where we're working. And Dr. Elin Torrell is going to help us do that by introducing some work in Tanzania. And Elin is an Associate Coastal Manager at the Coastal Resources Center at the Graduate School of Oceanography at the University of Rhode Island. And Elin and I first met, about 10 years ago. We were working together with my colleague Melissa Thaxton in a project in Tanzania. So I feel that we come full circle to come back to talking about Tanzania again today. So Elin, I'll give you the floor to say a few words to introduce the story we're about to hear about in Tanzania.
Okay, thank you. Well, the Balance Project worked in many countries of the world, but our two sort of flagship countries were Tanzania and the Philippines. And you're going to see a short film that the Wilson Center actually made about our work on PHE in Tanzania, and it will showcase 3 of our champions, and you'll learn more about the integrated activities.
Great, thank you. If you want to just, that way they can see.
In the last decade, Tanzania's sustained economic growth, political stability, and considerable natural resources have made it a beacon for East Africa. But despite economic gains, high rates of poverty persist in the country's rural coastal communities, where access to quality healthcare is limited. The added pressure of rapid population growth burdens the fragile social service system and places greater stress on natural resources and the surrounding environment. The seemingly simple act of cooking the day's meal was helping to destroy Tanzania's Saadani National Park and the surrounding forests, where community members cut wood for fuel even though it is forbidden by law. The introduction of a new and relatively cheap energy-saving stove addresses these complex and connected issues with a practical solution.
Mabadiliko, zamani tulikuwa tunapata shida sana. Wakati wa kuamka kufanya kazi zetu, itabidi asubuhi tushite tukoke moto, tupuzie. Lakini hili majiko toka tulivyopata, kuokota tu kama vile malanda yale, unaweka kuni, unaweka malanda na moto kidogo basi.
The old stove they used to use per day you need 9. Per day you need 9, but this today you need for this one only 3. The whole day you cook. The old stoves, you have to face the smoke. Smoking is too much. For the health benefit, that's very important. So this one, there's very minimal smoke, which for us, health part is very important.
Along with the health and environment benefits, the energy-saving stove affords more time to focus on improving livelihoods and generating income, especially for women. Rukia, a peer educator on topics as diverse as savings and loans, reproductive health, and conservation, has gone from owning an energy-saving stove to selling bread and honey. The proceeds from sales allowed her to afford a new roof for her house.
Enzi za zamani wazazi walikuwa tuseme walikuwa kina mama hawana haki. Halafu pia ilikuwa hakuna biashara za kujihangaisha. Kwa sasa hivi kidogo tunashukuru, hasa tunashukuru TCMP. Toka alipoingia yani katika kijiji chetu kutoboa miradi, kina mama tumeamka tuko mbele.
Such practical and effective solutions like the energy saving stove are typical tools of an integrated approach known as PHE, or population, health, and environment. These major areas of development work, which are sometimes isolated in policy, are all naturally connected. To better understand the challenges these communities face, we need to examine how these issues interact. In the coastal regions of Pangani district, overfishing has become a problem. To keep up with increased consumption and make money, fishermen turn to exploitative and unsustainable practices.
Ni kutumia baruti ndio uvuvi ambao unaharibu mazingira. Na kutia dawa uvuvi haramu ule, sumu ndio uvuvi ambao unaharibu mazingira.
Helping to alleviate the need for exploitative fishing is the environmentally sound practice of seaweed cultivation. As an alternative livelihood, women in Pangani and Tanga districts cultivate plots along the nearby shores. It provides these women with a cash income roughly double what a family might earn from other, more environmentally destructive activities.
Mariculture activities are kind of alternative income generating activities to make them go from illegal fishing to other more environmental friendly activities.
While practices like seaweed cultivation and clean cook stoves are part of the solution, the need exists for a more holistic approach. The growing number of people dependent on local natural resources, trees for fuel, fish for subsistence, is unsustainable both economically and ecologically. Family planning and women's empowerment are key to a long-term integrated approach to addressing these problems.
Pale unapokuwa unazaa watoto wengi kupita maelezo, kwanza pana athari zinajitokeza mbili. Watoto wanaweza kupata utapiamlo kwa kutokana kwamba unashindwa kuwalisha lishe inayokamilika katika nyumba kwa sababu familia imekuwa ni kubwa. Na pili, panapokuwa na watoto wengi, ni lazima hali ya mazingira itakuwa ni mbaya tu. Itabidi uingie mpaka sehemu labda ukakate misitu kwa sababu ya kulisha watoto. Kikubwa tunachohamasisha kwamba watoto wawe wa wastani wa kuweza kwamba hawa watoto wanaweza kuwalisha, kuwavisha na kuwatunza kielimu.
Training community members is one of the most important tools for PHE projects like this. They train local villagers like Fidea to become PHE peer educators who can discuss the linkages of conservation and health with their neighbors.
Mabadiliko yote yapo kwa sababu toka tulipoanza mambo ya kuhamasisha mambo ya afya na wengine wale ambao walikuwa hawana elimu ya kusema kwamba watoto wengi wanaleta athari, pia wamelielewa hilo, wamejirekebisha, na utumiaji wa uzazi wa mpango kama kondomu, sindano, vitanzi na nini, walio wengi wamehamasika sasa hivi wanavitumia hivyo vitu. Kwa hiyo pana faida ambayo imeonekana kati ya hapo.
PHE training is also given to small shop owners and community-based distributors to provide information about family planning, while family planning services are available from certified pharmacies as well as community-based distributors. By leveraging these points of contact for health services, information about PHE is delivered directly by fellow community members.
Uhusiano wa watu unaupata kutokana na mazingira ya biashara ninayoifanya. Huwa wanakuja hapa na kuomba ushauri wa baadhi ya mambo, mfano uzazi wa mpango. Sasa tukiwa katika sehemu ya uzazi wa mpango, huwa mara nyingi natumia kuwaelimisha kutokana na kondomu ninazouza na vidonge vya Flexp ambavyo ni vya uzazi wa mpango.
As access to family planning grows, the dynamics of these communities have begun to change.
The participation of women initially in Pangani was really poor, but after several trainings and the awareness campaigns in our activities regarding the theater shows and the mobile video units, we have been able to trigger some discussions, community dialogues, where women are now becoming active contributors and discussants of several development agendas in their communities.
Nakuwa naeleweka na jamii. kwa sababu wale waliokuwa hawanifahamu vizuri sasa hivi wameniinua kwamba na mimi naeleweka katika kijiji. Hata kwenye mikutano mikuu wananielewa, hata nikisimama nikizungumza kitu wananielewa kwamba mimi ni nani. Kwa hiyo ninajisikia na amani kwa sababu nimepata elimu. Nimepanua mawazo, akili na na ufahamu wa kuweza kuzungumza na mtu yoyote. Na ndio maana ninaweza kuzungumza hata na wale wagonjwa wa VVU bila shida yoyote.
Nilikuwa ni mtu kujisikia hivyo, pakiwa na watu wanaume kama 3 4 siwezi kupita. Lakini sasa hivi niko imara, hata kama pakiwa na watu 1000 mimi ninasimama, lakini kutokana na ile elimu ambayo tumeelimishwa, kwa mfano ujasiriamali, uendeshaji wa mazingira. Kwa hiyo ni elimu kwa ujumla iliyotupatia imetutia faraja mpaka sasa hivi tuko sawa katika mazingira yote tukokumbana nayo.
For generations, women like Rukia, Mahija, and Fidea have served as the glue for rural villages in Tanzania and around the world. Through the PHE approach, these women are now empowered to better use their resources, to plan their families, and to improve their livelihoods. Through their empowerment, they are able to promote a more balanced, sustainable way of life in their community and for generations to come.
So Eden, I wonder, as a technical expert who has worked on these issues for a number of years, and when you look at this story, what do you see as being at the heart of this story for you?
For me, at the heart is really the champions themselves, the volunteers, Fidea, Rukia, Mihuga, the women in the movie. But not only them, also we have Dr. Role, Emmanuel, Frida, the people sort of at the district level who are speaking. They live and breathe PHE every day. And the women are just fantastic. I've known Rukia for almost 10 years now, almost as long as you, Roger Mark. And it's amazing to see how she's developed and become a leader in her community. She works on all kinds of issues. She works on domestic violence. She works on HIV/AIDS. She works on the fuel-efficient technologies, on family planning. She's working, educating young adult women on family planning. She takes a lot of initiative. And I think that I think the reason why she and many of our other peer educators get so committed, and they really, they are committed to continue and doing this, is because through the Balance Project, we really work to cross-train them in different things. So Rukia she's a member of the Saving Credit Association. She's doing the bakery. She has the fuel-efficient stills. She's also a peer educator. So by engaging people in many different activities, people have a lot of different incentives to continue. And they also see the integration very naturally because they live in those communities and they see them on a day-to-day basis. I feel also very proud of the work that we did in Tanzania to train this community-based distributors, because we do see that there was a need for them. A survey that we did recently showed that 31% of the pill users in these communities get their supplies from the CBDs. And so there obviously was a need for them. We're also seeing a small increase of the contraceptive prevalence rate, which is nice. And we see a bigger involvement and interest among men in family planning, which is great, and also among youth through a youth initiative that Ricky was working with. And actually Ricky, who's sitting next to me, he can chip in and say a lot of things probably because he's been our main technical advisor on PHE in Tanzania, working alongside with me for the last 5 years.
Great. So I was quite taken by you saying that they live and breathe PHE every day. They see integration naturally. This is something I have heard over the years. You know, I don't live my life in silos. This is reflective of real life. So it's a real meaningful approach. I'm also very struck by what several of the women said in the film. We women are now awake and have moved forward. Now they know who I am. Now I stand strong. So very powerful words. Have these women in the film seen themselves saying this? Have we been able to take this film back to them and reflect this story back to them? And if so, what is the reaction, or what are your thoughts about taking these stories back to the community and engaging them at that level?
Right. I don't think we're doing enough of that. I think we are taking their stories, and we are broadcasting them and showing them here and in other places. We're very proud of them, but I'm not always sure we're very successful in showing them how proud we are of them, you know? And
very interesting.
Yeah. So we do invite them, like Rukia. We had a congressional delegation from the US recently in Bagamoyo, and Rukia was one of the people who came, and she watched the movie then, you know. So yes, I think we do show them some of these messages and stuff, but I do believe we could do more of that.
Mm-hmm. And do you think they would be surprised to see themselves presented in this way?
Well, I think Rukia would be very interested or surprised to find that she and I are in a mega poster at the University of Rhode Island showing the beauty of studying international development. But no, I'm sure they would appreciate it.
Okay, great. I think there's a number of points I hear you raising there that raise additional questions to me that I hope we will get into in our broader discussion. So I'd like to move now to Ricky, whom Elin has just introduced. So we affectionately call him Ricky, but he's Dr. Enrique Hernandez, and he has more than 25 years of experience in public health, technical areas of expertise, training, capacity building, multi-sectoral approaches, HIV/AIDS prevention programs, sexually transmitted disease program, family planning, and reproductive health. And I've had the privilege and the honor of seeing Ricky in action in the field, and it really is quite a privilege to see the degree that Ricky is able to transfer the skills and have a real sense of where the community needs are. So it's a really an important approach, and that you have Ricky. So I wanted to ask you just to say a few words about this slide here. So you have a number of seed grantees. Just say a couple words about what's up here, these countries, the range of countries, and what this approach is about with seed grants.
Thank you very much, Roger Mark, for that very kind introduction. Good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for this rare opportunity. The balanced strategy for advancing PHE in other countries involved providing seed grants to teach new organizations interested in the PHE approach on how to implement PHE. And 5 organizations from 4 countries received these seed grants. And you can see up here that we had the Ethio Wetlands and Natural Resources Association that does wetlands conservation in southwest Ethiopia, the Wildlife Conservation Society that provides livelihood around the communities of the national parks in Zambia. And then we had 2 organizations in Uganda. The first was the Bwindi Mangahinga Conservation Trust, the Dust Gorilla Conservation in the impenetrable parks, and the other one was the Volunteer Efforts for Development Concerns that was teaching poor farmers to do sustainable agriculture. The 5th organization was a Woodland Park Zoo, implementing the tree kangaroo conservation program.
So it's a really nice range of program types and geographies. And do you think the seed grant program was successful? And if so, what was the secret behind the success? What worked?
It would be difficult for a single organization to implement PHE all by itself. So I would consider that key to the success of these projects were the partnerships and the collaborations with the government, with the private sector. Organizations, it was important for organizations to link up with networks and become part of these networks in order to access the expertise and the additional resources needed to implement PHE, which the organization may not have had.
Okay, and when you think about this process and you say, okay, we've awarded these seed grants, we've had some success, we've really capitalized in bringing these organizations together in partnership, is there any lesson you think you, as an administrator of this program, has learned that you wish you knew at the very beginning?
I guess we could have done better in terms of understanding the policy environment or the way that the government's structure and the way and the policies and the programs that the government had in place. I think we could have done better knowing that. Of course, also local culture and the ways that especially the ways that information is spread. It was later in the implementation of the project that we got to learn about traditional ways, so like the idea of Ethiopia. These are the coffee ceremonies where later on we're actually used to inform people about population health and
So
environment.
talk a little bit more about that example. Why was that important? How did you use this coffee ceremony?
These coffee ceremonies are held regularly, almost daily in the community, where neighbors gather for coffee in the afternoon and talk about just about any issue that was prevailing in the community. And it was a very good opportunity to start introducing the concepts of the links between population health and environment.
Okay. So one of the factors that we know about population health and environment programs is that they have been implemented with success across a variety of ecosystems. We've seen them in coastal areas, in dryland areas, in mountains, around wetlands, around a lake basin, in forested areas. And you have sort of a range of ecosystems that you have also worked with the seed grants. Have you come to any additional knowledge about implementing PHE programs across different ecosystems? Any additional insights for us who are thinking more broadly about integrated programs?
Most important lesson I think we learned is that, and validated, is the fact that PHE can be replicated and scaled up. As you know, we were, the PHE model that was developed in the Philippines was developed for coastal resource management. And so that was the model that we adapted and modified. And so we were able to do this by taking into consideration the implementing organization's goals, the specific situation in a particular place, the dynamics of the issues that were interacting to produce that situation. But nevertheless, even if this PHE was implemented in different settings, all were done within the context of improving people's lives and addressing the issue of population pressure on on the natural resources that these organizations were trying to conserve.
So Ricky, very often when we talk about these development programs and moving from a pilot phase to demonstration phase to an implementation phase and a results phase, we often talk about scaling up. And you yourself just mentioned scaling up. Could you just tell us what you mean by scaling up?
There are different ways that projects or programs are scaled up. I guess the most common would be geographically scaling up in terms of replicating, in different places what has been done. But also, in this case, because we had, for example, the coastal resource model. We were able to scale this up to terrestrial and to other ecosystems. And I guess now environmentalists are looking at this ridge to reef, approach, and so that's why it becomes more relevant that the approach that we developed for the coastal areas is now being applied in the terrestrial or the upland areas. Also, the PHE is more of a community-based. It's a community-based approach, and that is where this integration best happens at the level of the community. And so, what happens is, initially you work with local governments and local structures, and then eventually move up and try to move within the government structures in order to be able to scale up this community-based approach to probably a more national or more regional, approach that can be implemented, more like a bottom to top scale up.
So you've been involved in these seed grants, and when you reflect on these seed grants, is there a story that comes to mind where you feel most proud? What do you think you've been really able to accomplish? You say, this is a really good story behind these seed grants. I want to share the story. It keeps me going. I feel good about this. We've made some progress. We have more to do, but is there any story like that comes to mind?
I guess as I mentioned earlier, they were implemented in different settings, but all of them have a similar context. They all seek to improve the quality of life of people. They seek to alleviate poverty, and although I think one more thing that we learned here is that whereas we initially were talking about biodiversity rich areas where PHE operates best, if you notice, one of our seed grants was actually to the volunteer efforts for development concerns in Uganda, which were just simply teaching poor farmers sustainable agriculture and trying to improve their lives. And PHE worked very well, even outside of that biodiversity reach.
Yes.
So PHE can do more. I mean, it can be applied even in other situations where the issues of poverty, food security, and livelihood improvement, and all those development issues, I think PHE can be applied.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Ricky. We'll build on that broader application as we move forward. So we're going to move now to a long-time friend and colleague and advisor, Janet Edmond. Janet is the Senior Director for Social Policy, Rights and Governance in the Center for Environment and Peace at Conservation International. She's a long experience working on these issues. And Janet, I know that you were involved in a specific component of the Balance project that really focused on knowledge management. So you have a few slides that you want to talk about in terms of the PHE community of practice. So tell us what you're showing us here. This looks interesting.
Great. First, I want to thank all of our old friends that I see in the audience. This is so exciting that you've come to celebrate the end of the Balance Project. So don't forget there's a reception afterwards, so stay and mingle with us. As Linda said, the goal of the Balance Project was to really promote and advance PHE approaches. So what we really needed to be able to do that were the tools and the resources to show everybody how great this development approach is. So many of you will remember back in 2008 when this project started, University of Rhode Island Coastal Resource Center was a fairly new player in the PHE world. Certainly had been working on coastal management activities for a long time, but kind of bringing in the P. They were definitely a new partner for the Office of Population and Reproductive Health. As we've talked about, PFPI implemented the iPopcorn project, which was underway for several years in 2008, and CI, which is an organization that really advances biodiversity conservation and human well-being together as a package. We had a population environment project from 2002 to 2008 in Madagascar, the Philippines, and Cambodia. So we really came together as a team, and we really needed to learn, where are we starting from and where do we need to go? So this crazy map up here is actually the result of a social network analysis that we did. It's actually a scientific technique. I've seen people in the health office present on this. So bringing together the health environment aspects together, it was really interesting to look and see how communication was flowing across the PHE community. We had kind of a lot of researchers and academics talking on one side. We had NGOs talking on another side. We had some very key nodes of information, like Joanne and Ricky were definitely in there as the people that you'd turn to for PHE information. So we really needed to look and see how it was flowing and then do a really good job of kind of broadening that communication and looking to really expand our community that way. And so we did have an example, Juma, who you saw in the video earlier, I think. He in Tanzania, it was very much connected to Roger Mark. It may not seem he's very connected, but there's lots of pathways through which he can be connected. Yeah, don't squint too much, it's a little hard to read. So anyway, we used this as we were developing our communication tools and our products. So next one. I'm going to tell you about 3 highlights from our knowledge management activities. So first of all, hopefully you are all familiar with the population environment PHE toolkit, as we call it. Back in 2008, we were lucky that there was an existing PHE website. It was hosted by the Environmental Health Project, which was funded by USAID. And it was really a collection of documents, really kind of what was existing at the time. But it was a little hard to search. It was a little hard to find stuff. There were probably not a lot of tools up there. So what we did as a team was come together, look and see what was there, and look and see how we could really develop something that was a little more user-friendly. And luckily, around the same time, USAID's Knowledge for Health project was relaunching as part of Johns Hopkins University's longtime partnership with USAID. So we were very fortunate we were able to build off their platform. And we did an analysis of emerging topics, trends, and we came up with a framework, which is what's up there now. So that we feel is a real lasting legacy that we leave the PHE community. So that's one. And then also the tools. We did a real comprehensive look at what was existing at the time when the Balance Project started, and then we interviewed people. We said, what do you need? What further needs to be put together? And so we were able to come up with 21 tools and resources that are all up on the PHE toolkit, where you can find, and just a couple of them that we feel are very useful, the behavior monitoring surveys, which are done before projects and after projects to measure change. Those are very, very important. We used a lot of PFPI's existing materials, so we were very happy to leverage those and use those and update those. And then the last is what you've already seen in the film, The Champions. We produced about 20 stories from all these different countries that we worked in, a couple that we were partners with. And so we really feel like this is putting the human face on PHE. These topics can be kind of esoteric sometimes, but when you look at Archaea and you see what's happening, you really do understand that it's important to bring all these elements together. So we just had 3 kind of quick lessons learned. We felt it was really beneficial to cast the net wide. We feel like since 2002, the PHE community has definitely grown. We've established some links with the academic organizations, some new players, so we're pretty happy about that. We've also, like I said, leveraged the existing resources. We didn't reinvent the wheel. We looked at where the gaps were, the tools. And then basically, the voices with the film, we feel like that has really given us a big boost in terms of advocating for PHE and getting more people excited. So overall, we do feel like we have a lasting legacy, and I will just put in a personal pitch. I have used all of my PhD knowledge in a different activity, which is also funded by USAID. Under the Africa Biodiversity Collaborative Group, we're looking at integrating water, sanitation, and hygiene efforts with freshwater conservation. So a lot of the principles and a lot of the work that's been done is really helping to build upon that. So.
Okay. So Janet, you specifically mentioned filling knowledge gaps. What were some of those gaps that you were working to fill through this knowledge management platform?
I think, when we surveyed people, they came up with a variety of things they needed. Policy briefs, survey tools, IEC materials, information communication materials, those kind of things, job aids. And when we looked at what was needed and we looked at what was in kind of the purview of the Balance Project, we really felt like manuals, training manuals on the community-based distributors, the peer educators, those were where we wanted to put our focus. Also the survey tools, we thought it was really good to have those. Policy briefs were not really our thing, so we left those to others.
And so I hear you talking a lot about the formats and how that information was presented. Could you talk a little bit more about what specific knowledge was missing?
I think really how to put together an integrated project. That's something, we have the population part, we have the health part, the environment part, so really bringing it all together, I think that was really the integration piece, which is very, very difficult to kind of capture in just one or two words.
Right.
But how do you get the different sectors talking to each other? How do they reach common ground, common vision?
Okay, and we all do these kinds of projects, do these wonderful resources. You talk about having a wonderful legacy that you're leaving for the PhD community. Could you talk about how you drive traffic to this? How do you get people to use it? How are you engaging? How will that legacy live on? Who's using it? How are they using it? Talk a little bit about those components.
So we do feel like the PhD community is using it. I'm sure it's probably more U.S. and kind of northern voice, northern developed country focused right now. We did try to push it out more to get to the South. We obviously have big challenges to overcome with internet connections on that. But all the conferences that we went to, we would hand out a little postcard with the toolkit address, and then also Hopkins, the Knowledge for Health Project at the time had these great little thumb drives where you could just take the whole toolkit and download it and give it out to people. I'm not sure that is still in existence.
Yeah.
I think they're up for a rebid, so maybe that will be part of the future. But really getting the information out to people in a variety of ways, listservs, other things like that.
Okay, so just last night I was reading an evaluation of an integrated rural development program. So not a PhD program, but an integrated program nonetheless, focusing on rural development. And I was struck by this comment from that evaluation. And I don't know if you agree with it or not, so I'm putting it out there to ask you what you think in the context of the work that Balanced has done. And this evaluation stated that investing in people rather than institutions has a far greater chance of success and sustainability. What do you think? You agree, you disagree, it depends? What are your thoughts?
I think in following along this line of the champions and getting their stories out, I would agree with that. I think of a champion we highlighted in the Democratic Republic of Congo, who was a doctor out there working in a health clinic and doing environmental messaging at the same time. He got elected later to the Congress. And so I do think, things change and people grow, and even though people may move on, in many of these countries we work, there is brain drain, but I do think that if you invest and they are role models and leaders, many other people will follow along the future Archaeas in that community, that thing. I do personally believe that, but I do think it's also important to work at the institutional level, but I really think showing the human well-being impact is really important for all communities, definitely. And I do think on the conservation community, we need to see that as well.
So I'm quite struck as you speak. You talk very often about the PHE community, and then you say you've been able to use this approach outside of the PHE community. What is this PHE community? Who's in this community? Who are the outsiders? Who are the insiders? What are you talking about, really? What's this PHE community about?
Maybe that 1,400 people who are on the listserv. Right? I mean, to me, it's anybody who's interested in making the connections between health and environment. You know, sometimes the population scares people a little bit, I think, due to lack of understanding.
Yep.
And I think getting messages out to anybody who's interested in making this connection, you know, we don't live lives in sectors, and I think it's impossible to ignore that fact. So, but I mean, if you think of all the people who've worked on PHE, the donors, it is a very large and growing. And since 2008, it really has grown. We're seeing a lot more development groups, health groups.
Great. Okay. And I would say for me, and I think of this a little bit more broadly, I think of a community that's interested in integration, and PHE is part of that. But in my mind, I tend to think of a broader community that involves PHE, but I don't think exclusively in terms of a PHE community. But I think we can debate that as we move forward. So thank you very much, Janet. So I wanted to go now to talk to Joanne. And Joanne and I have worked together for a long time also. Joanne has more than 10 years of international health experience in designing, planning, implementation, supervision, management, evaluation, monitoring of projects related to population and coastal resource management, integration, HIV/AIDS, sexually transmitted diseases, and other reproductive health issues. And I know that you have a number of images for us, Joanne, in the Philippines. And as we have this as a little bit of the framing and the context for PHE integration in the Philippines, do you want to say a few words about the images that we're seeing?
Yeah. Thank you, Roger Mark, and good afternoon, everyone. As I speak in the next few minutes or so, a lot of the pictures would be snippets of the things or the highlights of people in action that the Balance Philippines have touched and who touched us as well as we implemented the project.
Okay. So I wondered whether you could say a little bit more about what has been going on in the Philippines under the Balance Project. I know that we said one of the flagship countries is Tanzania, the other one is the Philippines. Talk a little bit more about what has been happening in the Philippines.
In the past 3 years, we were able to receive funding from 2 offices of USAID, the Office of Health and Office of Energy and Environment and Climate Change. So it's actually the very, very first buy-in from 2 offices from our experience in implementing PHE since we've started it in 2000. So the Balance Philippines is a buy-in from a mechanism of the Balance Project, and it's been implemented by 2 organizations, Path Foundation Philippines and Conservation International. It's also implemented in 2 key biodiversity areas that are threatened by population, the threats of population pressures. And we were in 28 municipalities. So those were, if you so one of the slides that passed through identifies the 2 key biodiversity areas that we worked in, and it's only 2 of the many biodiversity areas, but these are the 2 important ones that it's a source of food and livelihood for over 1 million of people in these communities. The Balance Philippines project is a scale-up of a project that we've implemented previously in 2000. That's the Integrated Population and Coastal Resource Management, which allowed us to be in every village of all the 28 municipalities, originally 29. So it spells also of the things that we did in this project and our successes and some of the challenges that we've had. So I we credit the Balance Philippines credits, you know, the partnership that we've had with the two USAID missions under the leadership of Ann Hershey of Health and Rolf Anderson of the Office of Environment. After 3 years of implementing this program, we've seen a lot of progress and lessons learned and experience that we had in this. We improved access to family planning needs and services in each of these very remote areas. We also passed 4 PHE ordinances, which is quite a feat because this is a measure of the commitment of the local governments and to sustain and to maintain the gains of the project and put it in a longer term sustainability programs in those areas. We also have had a lot of PHE champions from both health and environment in both these networks. We were able to provide conservation incentives to the people that we worked with, particularly in marine protected areas where we actually strengthened the committees that were in these communities that were also affected by the population pressures.
So Joanna, I'm just intrigued and fascinated that you got funding from 2 different USAID offices, health and energy and climate change. Talk a little bit about that. How did you do that? How did you get them to do this? Was it easy? Were there difficulties in sort of having to deal with funding from two offices? Talk a little bit more about that experience. It's very unusual and very intriguing and seems to be at the heart of what this PHE approach is about.
There's no easy formula.
We tried.
But there's a lot from the experience that we've had. I could share you some of the insights. And one of this is there is an evidence. The Philippines, the long-standing experience in implementing an integrated project has allowed us to be able to have an evidence of the synergy of integration. There were models that we've developed that made it easier for us to advocate and educate that there's relevance and there's benefit to integrating population and coastal resource management. And I'm speaking particularly in the context of the Philippines. I would like to believe that there are 2 offices, particularly in the Philippines, that believe that there's co-benefit in integration towards human well-being, towards conservation of biodiversity, and sustainable development. So there are NGOs like Path Foundation Philippines and Conservation International that were committed to be able to do integrated work. There are champions, new and emerging leaders that we were able to build as a constituency to help us convince local policymakers and also the USAID mission that integration works. So I think those are the key elements of being able to convince 2 offices, which I also believe is one of the legacy of the Balance Project. The very first, which shows that there's really integration. It can be integrated.
I'm quite intrigued. You mentioned that you were in the Philippines, that they passed 4 PHE ordinances. What is a PHE ordinance? What does that mean exactly?
It's a lot of effort of advocacy over the project. So when we start implementing a project, it's really very programmatic. You set up a community-based distribution system, but you have to think as you start the program that you need to sustain all the efforts or the inputs that you've had, and you want it to be mainstreamed and supported and owned and embraced by the local government and the people where you do this project, because it is innate in every program implementer that these are programs and then you're going to leave. Like today, you know, there's a start and you're ending anyway. So you build a lot of capacity building. And so this PHE ordinances builds the capacity of the local governments and national and the community to be able to integrate the PHE approach and be able to sustain and manage beyond the project life. So the PHE ordinance has provisions that puts PHE or integrated in their agenda, in their development plans, and also develops a cadre of leaders that can sustain the whole initiative to provide supervision and management.
And is there any budget allocation as part of that ordinance? Is there?
Yes, thank you, Roger Mark. That's part of that. So it's part of the process wherein you work with the local legislators. And that reminds me of what Ricky mentioned earlier, that you need time to understand the local governance system so that it is not only a project. It's going to be owned by the community, whether it's bottoms up or top down. But I think in PHE, you have to do both. You have to build experience and evidence on the ground to be able to scale it up to a national level. Because again, I'd like to refer to what Ricky said. PHE is a community-based initiative, wherein you get goodwill and support from the community themselves.
So, Joanna, as I look at the images that you had here, I was quite struck by one of the images of a gentleman on the beach, and he has on a T-shirt. At the back of his T-shirt, it says that he's a coastal law enforcer. Tell us a little bit about that component, this enforcement component. Are you working with, how is that a part of this work?
Yeah, because the focus of our work was working with people's organizations, building leaders in people's organization that takes care of the marine protected areas. So these are existing institutions, these are existing leaders that you add the information and the capacity to be able to be peer educators as well, because they already have their own networks and their own contacts. So they don't only bring the main task that they do to take care of their marine protected areas, but they educate the rest of the community and the rest of the coastal law enforcers about the need to link and address population health and environment, which simply is plan your families, manage your resources for a better future, for a brighter future, for a secure household, healthy environment, and healthy people.
Okay. Thank you very much, Joanne. It's wonderful to hear the continuing successes in the Philippines example. So our final commentary will come from Linda Bruce. As you know, she's been the director of the Balance Project since October 2008, and she provides technical leadership and guidance to USAID, missions, ministries of health, and a number of key stakeholders on these issues. And Linda and I first met a number of years ago when she was really working on providing technical support and training programs. So has a long history of bringing a commitment to capacity building on these issues. And as Linda, those of us in Janet's PHE community know, there have been some assessments about the impacts of PHE work and on integration. Could you provide a little bit of context about those assessments and any sort of preliminary thoughts that you have?
Yes, Roger Mark, thank you. Before I begin, I just wanted to make one clarification about the Balance Philippines project. It was implemented together with both PFPI and CI, and I just wanted for that to come out clear. CI worked very closely with PFPI on some of the marine protected areas and the conservation enterprise activities. So wanted to make that make sure that came out. Yes, in 2007, there were a series of assessments done on the past efforts and energies about on PHE, and based on that assessment, we sort of developed our proposal to address some of the issues that were brought up in these assessments. Now, the assessment had many, many issues, very interesting comments about the history of PHE and some of the challenges. I've picked only 3 or 4 today to address, to talk about how balanced, number one, addressed them, how they remain. I chose them because they remain continuing issues, and to sort of jumpstart us in a dialogue about what's next. So one of the issues that particularly resonated with me were 2. Practitioners saw the value of added benefits to the PHE, but capacity building to implement these programs was weak. And I'm going to say the next one because they're both sort of integrated together. East Africa is seen to be a good region for discovering more effective ways to introduce family planning, health, livelihood, and conservation activities into remote communities that have not received government services. Well, first of all, next slide. First of all, Balance really took the capacity building issue to heart. We know that there was a lot of capacity building that needed to happen, and it needed to happen a lot in East Africa. As we were looking at what countries do we really focus on, where's the biggest need, East Africa popped up over and over and over again. It is an area with huge biodiversity and large population demands on the natural resources. It was a very natural for us. Of course, we were a small project, so we only chose 6 to 7 projects to work in East Africa, but it was by far the main reason we chose it was because it was ripe for the picking. We also trained over 2,000 people. I want to go backwards, actually. We had a very, thanks to PFPI, we had a very unique train-the-trainer program. And so we trained 268 master trainers, most of them from Africa. And they, in turn, 40% of those master trainers trained other people. Now, I know at the beginning that PFPI thought that was really low, but as a trainer, I think it's really high. I'd be thrilled if 40% of the people that I trained to be trainers would go out and train others. These trainers are responsible for training 2,000 people from 72 organizations in 8 countries. So I should have actually done it the other way around.
And who are they training?
They were training their peers.
Okay.
They were training their peers. So we trained them how to train the community-based distributors, how to train the peer educators, what is PHE, how to train on IEC.
So this was expanding Janet's PHE community.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Okay.
Janet doesn't even know some of these people.
Oh, Janet.
Okay.
Okay.
So it's and thanks. I will say I'm going to give a plug to PRB, who has the
Population
PHE
Reference Bureau.
Thank you, Population Reference Bureau, who has the PHE Africa listserv as well. So a lot of these things also get out to our African counterparts. And so, in addition to building, we also saw the need that was just not capacity building. We built the capacity of people who are actually implementing or wanting to implement or new to PHE, because you can't train them and then leave them and let them go back to their office. They need to be able to go back and do. So, and the reason I want to combine this with East Africa is because we focused a lot of efforts in East Africa. We had a seed grant in Ethiopia. Ethiopia is bursting at the seams right now with PHE, thanks to the generous support of the Packard Foundation. They're very, very active in PHE. Uganda, since I've begun, Uganda, there was CTPH and maybe a couple small projects. Now there's the Hope LVB project with Packard Foundation and MacArthur. We had 2
What's this
grants.
project? Sorry.
The helping. Oh shoot!
But where is it? Where
It's in Uganda.
Okay.
It's in Uganda and Kenya. Thank
Okay.
you. It's integrated project funded by Packard and MacArthur.
Okay.
I forgot what the acronym stands for. I'm
Okay.
sorry. So
It's
they're
around Lake
starting.
Victoria?
It's around Lake
Okay.
Victoria
Oh,
Basin.
okay.
Thank you. You're pulling it out of me. Thank you, Roger Mark.
We'll get there. We'll get
We're
there.
getting there. Thank you. It's around the Victoria Basin, and it's both in Kenya and in Uganda. So we have that project. Balance provided some technical assistance to them, but they're really gung-ho now. There's also a PHE network
Okay.
that's in Uganda. We have 2 seed grants in Uganda. So Uganda's really beginning to flourish. Tanzania is a late starter, but they're beginning, the Ministry of Health is now beginning to say, oh, I want to be part of PHE now. They're
Why?
also...
Why?
I'm not quite sure. Matt Erdman can tell me about that one because he heard it when he was in a conference in Rwanda.
Matt, we're going
So
to be coming
what
back
did
to
you
you.
hear?
We want to know why.
Yeah. So
why are
listen-
these new people coming on board on PHE? So think about it. We're
Think
coming
about
back.
it. We'll come back to it. There's also a PHE conference in Tanzania coming up, if I'm not mistaken. And so Tanzania is beginning to. I was hoping that it would start a little bit faster with balance, but you know, I think every country goes on its own time for whatever reason, for its own reasons. Jane Goodall has been very active in Tanzania as well, and the Nature Conservancy and Pathfinder are starting a very small activity in the Twange region, which is outside of Kigoma. So there are definitely efforts beginning in East Africa. I will say also in Kenya, there are some efforts there. East Africa is very ripe. We've got a really nice, strong cohort of not only trained people, but organizations that are now implementing PHE. So I'm hoping that it's a plea in a way for any donor and people who want to work in this field to look at East Africa as a really ripe area ready to really expand. It's really at a stage where it can begin replicating and scaling up, I believe, with some resources. So I think that capacity building in East Africa are sort of go hand in hand for us.
So you talk about developing this capacity, having this wonderful set of master trainers who are going out and training others and being concerned that they go back and do. Talk a little bit about the doing. What is being done as a result
They're
of
actually
this
implementing. These
Uh-huh.
trainers are the ones who are in our seed grants.
Okay.
Who are the ones who are from the Hope LVB project.
Okay.
There were also other non-seed grant folks that we just provided technical assistance to them because they were implementing PHE under other projects. For example, the Progress Project was doing an OR operations research project in in Kenya with the Greenbelt movement. So we provided some technical assistance there. So there were a lot of one-off organizations that we provided technical assistance that were doing integrated work that were what was outside of our 5 seed grants.
Okay, so it sounds as if you've identified this need. You had a really good geographic scope to work with. You brought those two together. You've really built a cadre of people who are going out and doing the training and doing. What remains to be done? Have you done it all?
We have not. Africa is big, very big, very remote.
Okay.
And we've just scratched the surface. And there are a lot of people more interested now. But it's a big country. It's got a lot of needs. All of us in here, I'm sure, work in development. We know.
So
what
you're
that
focusing
means.
on, do you mean primarily East Africa, or are you saying we need to think about West Africa? What are
Yes,
you?
West Africa, for the conservation folks, if I get this wrong, please forgive me. But I think that East Africa has a lot more biodiversity threats than West Africa, although they're definitely there in West Africa. There are efforts happening in West Africa for sure. As a matter of fact, one of CRC's projects in Gambia was the Tri Association, and they were working on oysters. Was it oysters? Yeah, oyster sharking. And then the founder of Tri decided that they needed to go beyond that, and they needed to teach their daughters. It was the older women who captured the oysters. They need to teach their daughters about health and family planning. This happened organically, but it also happened when she heard about PHE in some of the courses that she's attended in coastal resource at CRC. So when people hear it, they get it. They understand it. They may not know exactly how to do it, but they see the need for doing it. It's how to exactly operationally integrate these different sectors is what I think people still need a little bit of assistance with.
Great. Thank you very much, Linda. So let's open it up. What do you think? Matt, we're coming to you, so we have a question. So, coming to you soon, but let's open it up. This is being webcast live. Okay, it's good. It's being webcast live. So when we come around with to get your questions, please identify yourself and speak into the microphone. But Linda, there are a couple other points you wanted to make quickly, and then we can open it up.
Yeah, I'll just breeze through these. Yes. The field is relying on a handful of champions and institutions and individuals, and is vulnerable to loss. Okay, so what I would like to say in the 8 years that the 5 years I've been working in PHE, I've seen some turnover. Some champions have moved on, moved out, organizations have switched. But on the other hand, I've seen a lot of new organizations dumping into the game, a lot of them. And so I would like to really address, and this should be a point for you, a question to ask the crowd too. I believe in champions, but I also believe in institutionalizing PHE. The reason I say that, because it shouldn't be seen as an activity. Okay, I got a little bit of money for this, now next. No, we really sought to work with organizations that really embrace the approach. I can quote 2 of our seed grants in East Africa that say, we have seen the light, we will never do it the old way again. We see the importance of bringing health and family planning into our way of doing business. And we see that more and more in the field as we're doing it. We haven't quite brought some headquarters along, but advocacy is needed. So I believe in institutionalizing PHE as well.
So Janet, you talked about, in response to my question, you had I think you agreed with a statement about whether you invest in people. Linda may agree a little bit less. She's saying it's good to invest in institutions. And any response to Linda's response?
No, I think it's all on a scale. It's all on a spectrum. I think for me, it's more about the people who are moving it. The institution, that's fine if there's some sort of policy or something, but I think it's really the people who move it. So that would just be, my reaction. So.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Janet. But as we've seen a couple times in Tanzania when we were trying to get something more going in Tanzania, we had one champion, and once that champion left, the organization dropped out of it. So if we could have bought...
If it's a champion, shouldn't that champion be taking the issue with him or her? Does a champion, by definition, ever really leave?
In this case, 2 champions left the country.
Okay.
Yes. So then the void was there.
Okay.
So how do you have enough champions to withstand those losses?
Okay.
That's what I'm trying to say.
So I'm intrigued by this slide, Linda, because partly because I'm not sure that I understand it. So you talk about USAID sector funds, HIDNEEE. What is that? Sorry.
Oh, there's a hidden health and infectious disease and nutrition.
Okay.
There's a USAID pots of money. There's also child survival. We are thrilled and over the moon that we received funding from 2 different sectors from USAID. Thrilled.
Excellent.
First time, super. I will tell you, though, that there are strings to that. And there are some restrictions to how you use certain pots of money. So it took us not us, I can really speak to PFPI and CI, but how they worked collaboratively to sort of overcome some of those restrictions on funds. But if the agency wants to really invest more largely, this is something they just need to sort of contend with, that there are certain restrictions. Like there was a training workshop we could not count on our performance monitoring plan because it wasn't paid for with family planning funds. It was paid for with office environment funds. So, little things like that, but there are other operational things.
But it still counts, just for your reporting.
You
couldn't for your reporting, but ultimately in terms of the impact.
Well, it counts in the field, correct.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
there are some restrictions to the use of the funds. So this is just something that we, as we integrate operationally, this needs to be taken into consideration.
Okay, thank you. Thoughts, questions, reactions, please. So yes, you put your hand up and you get a microphone.
Talking stick. I'm Tim Resch. I'm with USAID and the Bureau for Africa. Linda stole a little bit of my thunder. The observations I was going to make. One, I wanted to, as a historian, let people know that when the earmark first came out, there was a little bit of surprise within the sectors as to how, are there linkages? How are we going to do this? And such. There were others that were, doing cartwheels, that this was a good thing. But institutionally, USAID had some trouble swallowing this to start. I think noting how ideas and understanding have changed based on small successes, well articulated and shared, and building on others is a useful observation on how we can, in fact, foment change. The second thing I just wanted to say is on this challenge of a community-based activity, the small-scale pilot activities, and the challenge of I like going to scale rather than scaling up, and there's a fine distinction between that. And so part of that, and I think a challenge for into the future, is how do we create an enabling environment up the hierarchy so that we, PHE works with local communities, but they need authorization, they need funding, they need enthusiasm up to the levels of national governments, international donors, multi-donors. And the third observation is another organizing framework in the PHE community are faith-based institutions. So in Africa and many parts of the world, parochial faith-based institutions are in fact providing some of the education, some of the health activities, some of the environmental activities. And so as we look into the PHE future, thinking about how NGOs and governments work with the faith-based players at the church, the mosque, the temple, and all the way up to national and coordinating bodies. And so those are just three thoughts. There's questions implied in that, but I really, I thought about formulating these as questions, but they really aren't.
No, very, very good perspectives, yes. At the back, and then, so Jake, we'll do John. Please, go ahead.
My name is Christina Villegas. I work for a company called Estelle Levitt Limited. I'm an artisanal mining specialist, and I work a lot in conservation. My question is actually for Janet, and I was wondering if you can talk about some of the conservation impacts or outcomes of this project. I've heard a lot about the population outcomes, and whenever women have more control over their fertility, I think it's a great success. But it's also supposed to be an environmental project, so I wanted to hear more about that.
Great. Thank you. Let's take one more question for John.
Yes, I'm John Pielameyer, independent consultant. I really want to thank the panel for really excellent presentations and for Roger Mark for pushing us to remember what you've said by saying it a second time and keeping the conversation going very nicely. Two of the big issues that I think people have discussed are the two big S's. Sustainability and scale. Mm-hmm. And in both the Philippines, in my experience, and also in other places, those issues, sustainability relates in part to being able to carry on the project once the donor funding is gone. And in the Philippines, our work found that often that was because local governments had some money that they could allocate themselves to continue the programs if they were not expensive. In East Africa, do you find that local government and decentralization is strong enough for this potentially to occur? And can you, if you don't have local governments with their own resources, how does one sustain the programs? Mm-hmm. On scale up, it's very much linked to this issue here, but I also remember in the Philippines, people who are pushing for scale up in agriculture programs, it's often farmers talking to farmers. In this case, it was mayors talking to mayors about what they were doing in some of the areas of the Philippines. In East Africa, do you find groups that are interested and excited about passing on their experiences to others who might start those programs and therefore scale up within a region?
Okay, great. Thank you. So let's take these questions and then we'll come to you and others. So anyone would like to start? Janet, since at least one question was directed to you. Mm-hmm.
Sure, I can start on the conservation side. I think you've heard a little bit about kind of the Balanced Philippines project. So the environmental indicators on that were kind of the traditional environmental indicators, which are like hectares preserved in the marine protected areas that Joanne talked about, the hectares of marine areas that are conserved. We did do livelihood activities, so many of them are process, really number of people trained, number of women's groups that were operating. And anyone else can add to what is already kind of being said. It should just be noted, though, that this project primarily, until we get the buy-in from the Philippines Office of Environment, Energy, Environment, and Climate Change, is family planning money. So there were no specific indicators on the conservation side. This is one of our biggest challenges, is that we haven't had this melting pot of funds. And so hopefully that's one area that, you know, the future of PHE can tackle.
So it doesn't mean that they weren't outcomes, but that you were not specifically measuring them.
Yes,
is that
but
correct?
Elin is our M&E person, so she really shouldn't be answering.
And I'm the conservation person too. So I'll say a few words about the Philippines and about Tanzania. In Tanzania, we did strengthen marine protected areas. And, you know, Philippines is like the world renowned for all of its MPAs, but there are many of them that were started, but they don't really work that well. So when we started in the Philippines, we conducted assessments of all the MPAs in the Verde Island.
Marine protected areas.
In the Verde Island Passage and in the Dahanon Bank. And then we saw what the weaknesses were in the different MPAs. And we designed MPA, Marine Protected Areas, strengthening activities for both regions. We also designed a number of activities to strengthen the Bantay Dagats, who are those conservation officers that you saw the T-shirts that are patrolling the waters. So at the end of the program, we conducted a second assessment in the Dahanon Bank, and we found that, in fact, we have managed to improve the standard of we just assessed 10 of the MPAs, but we improved 6 of them, and we managed to maintain the others. Only 1 had gone down. So I would say that with the limited funds that we had in the Philippines, we managed to actually have some nice conservation outcomes. In Tanzania, the Balance Project infused a small amount of money into a larger conservation program that the Coastal Resources Center is running in Tanzania. So that program have a bunch of conservation activities. We are doing sea turtle conservation, we're doing no-take zoning in intertidal areas, we're doing elephant tracking, which is quite interesting for a coastal organization like CRC. So, of course, there's a lot of very nice conservation outcomes from those activities, but the Balanced itself only infused the money to train the community-based distributors and the peer educators. The nice thing, again, is that those peer educators are also working to promote fuel-efficient stoves, for example, and the Saving and Credit Association. So indirectly, you know, we're not measuring exactly the conservation outcomes, but through our surveys, we're seeing that people have a bigger understanding of the integration and also of the value of using those technologies.
Thank you. So we had a number of comments and questions about the enabling environment. You know, Tim raised this point and talked about going to scale, and John talked about sustainability and scale and decentralization. Any comments or thoughts or reactions on those sets of issues?
Can I
Please,
jump in again?
yes,
I don't
jump
want to
in.
hog the floor,
No.
but I just had I like John's comment about, you know, in the Philippines there is this local capacity and some finances. In Tanzania, we don't have that. I mean, to be honest, in the Pangani district where we are working, Dr. Ole and others at the district level, they love the PHE approach, but they don't have any resources to continue this work after we leave. Last time I saw Dr. Ole, he asked me, you know, is there any way for you to give us some money to continue monitoring and supporting the CBDs after the project ends? But so, well, that sounds kind of bleak, but we knew this, I think, when we went into it, and that's why we designed the program in a way that the CBDs are also, that they're connected to the Savings and Credit Association. So linking it to entrepreneurship, where the people who are volunteers, and they're not earning any money from being CBDs. They have to distribute all the commodities for free. But since they are become entrepreneurs in other ways, they sell fuel-efficient stoves, they sell bread, they have other activities, we believe that they have the capacity to continue, and they are CBDs in a government system. So they are certified government CBDs. They have, you know, it's not just that they're private distributors. So Dr. Oleg is their champion still, even if he can't go out very often, but he will go out sometime. And if they have the incentive to continue, I think that it has the chance to sustain.
Okay, any other comments? Ricky, please.
Yes, I commented earlier that what we learned later on that we didn't know from the beginning.
Yes.
was the fact that we could have done better knowing better about the government policies and programs and the way they implement these activities. It's true, it's very different in the Philippines where there is enough local government autonomy versus the very centralized governments in Africa, in East Africa. And Eileen also mentioned that the sustainability of this of PHE, especially being a community-based approach, is that the fact that it is community-based, and of course it's sustainable because the peer educators and the community-based distributors are not going to leave their communities and will continue with these activities. But also because they need the support, especially in East Africa, of the national and the regional governments. It's important to identify those mechanisms and those instruments that are going to allow for this kind of, for sustainability. So although we did not have enough time, and as I said, we learned much later on, we could have worked within existing broader development plans and tried to get this PHE approach integrated in those broader development plans. For example, in East Africa, there is enough, it's centralized all the way up to the district level, for example. So at the district level, there is enough autonomy to at least to although Eileen said there might not be enough resources, but there is enough planning going on at the district level. And then if you're able to bring up this community-based approach to the district level and get it incorporated in natural resource management plans, in comprehensive development plans and things like that, it's just a matter of identifying those entry points and see whether in what ways PHE can be integrated. And yes, I agree with Eileen that there is a chance for sustainability.
Okay. So, you know, I was wondering, Joanna, once again, Tim brought up this question of looking to PHE future and talking about work with faith-based individuals and organizations. Could you talk a little bit about that?
We've seen that in most of the areas where we work in, and I remember that it's a very strong player, particularly in Papua New Guinea, wherein that's the strongest institution that's available in very, very remote areas. It's stronger than the government. And I think
the faith-based
organization. So I think in part of the learning when we do PHE work is really learning the institutions that are strong, and whether they're faith-based or the local governments, that can be the sustainability of your program. In the Philippines, then there's the, you have to rely on what would be available. Like, for example, the decentralized form of government for the Philippines vis-a-vis the church. So there's it allows, the good thing with PHE is that it allows you to work within the system and work with the networks and institutions that are there. And it refers to one of the comments of creating an enabling environment for the hierarchy. So it's really top-down, bottoms-up, but also looking at the wider networks that they have so that you're able to find the right fit for the sustainability of the program. So that's how beautiful it is. It's so, and the community actually says it's a practical solution to their issues. So whether even if you're strictly Catholic, but then you're able to move around the other frameworks and systems that you can do the programs also with it.
So moving around those frameworks and systems, it sort of reminds me of Matt's opening comments about building trust and finding ways to build trust. So Tim, if that's okay, I have a question for you based on your non-questions. So your first comment about this initially being hard for an organization like or funder like USAID to swallow, and thinking about successes and how you articulate the small ones and share them. Could you talk a little bit more about that and give the PHE community, Janet's PHE community and others, a sense of how could we do that better? How can we continue to build on successfully telling those stories so that we can continue to convince others who find it at times hard to swallow? Any thoughts or reactions on that?
This may come as a surprise to you, but not everybody in USAID in the water, the population, health, environment community sees the Kool-Aid of how great integration is, and I think part of that is more telling our stories. Telling our stories better, and as Susan mentioned, breaking down those administrative, internally imposed biases. But it's also, we always have problems with jargon, and how we're comfortable working in the sector that we're trained in, and we see solutions based on based on our background, rather than kind of what people can tell us. It's a heck of a lot better than it used to be. It's not as good as it's going to be.
Okay, great, thank you. So we have a question up here. Can we get a microphone up here? And then we'll come to you, and then to Jason.
Thank you, Dave Rabinowitz. I was wondering, sort of following up on something Joanne said and came up earlier, working in countries like the Philippines and Uganda, and including family planning integrated into the other areas, have any of the projects or CBDs encountered pushback from religious institutions, and how do you handle that?
Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name is Victoria Hammond. I work for Cordia Global Health Foundation. We're an organization that establishes and supports Center of Excellence in Health in Sub-Saharan Africa. Sorry, I have a cold. My voice will be a little croaky. I had a question really on the integration piece. Some of you have already sort of elaborated on this, but could you talk a little bit more about how you've gotten the different players to talk to each other at the different levels from the ministry level? How do you get the Ministry of Agriculture to talk to the Ministry of Health, to talk to how did those conversations start? Were they very involved in this project? Also on a implementation or a curriculum development level, the trainings that you incorporated, how did you incorporate all those different aspects into one training, considering that there's different language, different methodologies for evaluating kind of across the board? How are you able to handle that? And then, sorry, my last question was just, do you have any examples of cost efficiencies that were created from your program? Because I think that, funding streams are siloed not just by USAID, but across. And if we can come up with ways to prove that this is a much more effective and cost-efficient way to implement programs, then we might have a more of a chance.
Great, thank you. Jason?
Thanks. I'm Jason Bremner from Population Reference Bureau. I appreciate all your insights and challenging questions about how we move things forward. And that's obviously something I think about a lot. First, to the idea of a PHE community. Obviously, community is a loaded term, and I do think that there is a PHE community of people here in Washington, and we get together often and talk. But one of the beauties of the work of the Balance Project and others is that the PHE community is, it's expanded greatly. There's so many voices, so many projects, and unfortunately, it still all comes back to the connections to Washington or to the Philippines. These kind of two nodes of money, really, of pots of money and expertise. And so my question to all of you is, how do we actually create a PHE community now that's inclusive of all of the new projects, new champions, and new people who've been collecting expertise but don't talk to one another. And how do we create that actual PHE community? And then the second question was, I heard a lot about the capacity building with East Africa institutions and individuals, but I'd really like to hear a little bit about the lessons on the best ways to build institutional and individual ability to implement the projects. I still see a lot of projects starting up and they don't really know how to do this. And I think, what's the best way to get them moving and get them started? Is it, by having Ricky visit them for a month? Is it by having a regional Africa-based organization that could be responsive quickly to questions or to visits for TA? And, what are your experiences from actually going to the seed grants and other projects that would help us think about how to be more responsive?
So Jason, in formulating your question, you talked about DC and the Philippines. Did you mean to exclude Ethiopia, or would you include Ethiopia as one of those nodes, or no? Given all that's happening with PHE in Ethiopia.
I think it's a node of a lot of interest and funding. I don't think it's a node yet of expertise.
Okay.
They're developing it on their own. They're figuring it out. It's been very reliant on PHE fellows who've been external and who've been experts. There's no center of expertise where somebody could say, how do I do this? How do I implement this? Where are the tools? It's starting, but I don't think we're there yet.
Okay, very interesting. Thank you. We had we'll take one more comment here and then some response.
James Sang, and this is a question for Ms. Bruce. You indicated that in looking for your experimental sites, you had a criteria of remote communities that had not received government services. From experience, as you relax those conditions of remote and have not received government services, how does the model's effectiveness change?
Thank you. So let's open it up. Anyone would like to start?
The last one is a simple one. Actually, that was an assessment. That was something I took out of an assessment. That was not what we did. We actually found that there were government services everywhere where we worked. The issue was accessibility. Even the most remote outposts in Ethiopia that had health extension workers, they still didn't reach some of the watershed sites. I mean, that's just one of several examples. I'm sure Ricky can give you others. So it wasn't that the government services weren't there. It's just even the more remote health outreach workers that didn't go to where our sites were. So by developing a CBD system, at least continuing pill users could go 2 kilometers instead of 20 to pick up their next set of pills. The other comment where there were no government services was from an assessment. I beg your pardon?
If you relax the remote.
Environment, how well would it work?
So do you see this being transferable to an urban environment?
Definitely. But I mean, that's a good question for PFPI. But yes, I would. But PHE is usually where population pressures are putting pressure on biodiverse natural resources. But sure, community-based distribution or any kind of method that gets health services, any kind of health services out beyond where the health community doesn't reach is applicable, whether it's remote or not.
Joanne, did you or Ricky, did you want to talk about urban environments and PHE? Was that?
No, I wanted to say
add
something on the community-based distribution
Please.
system. The community-based distribution system is composed of both free and commodities that are for sale. So that way, there is a segmentation of the market, so to speak, where people who can afford to buy get to buy. And so those who cannot afford are able to avail of free commodities, and they don't run out easily because those who can buy, in fact, buy. So we experienced this in Ethiopia, for example, where they were not only very remote, as Linda mentioned, but the Ministry of Health allowed the project to train kiosk store owners to actually implement a cost recovery system for the commodities. And so I think with the question of whether that could apply in an urban setting, then I think a community-based distribution system that carries both free and commodities that are for sale can be implemented, and that would at least decrease the burden of the government for trying to supply free commodities to everyone, and those who really need it don't run out, because those who can afford can buy.
Okay, any thoughts, Joanne, please?
Maybe just a quick response to the pushback on the religion. Yes, there's a lot of that in the Philippines, but I think with the increasing education and partnership, it's getting less of a resistance from our partners and in the implementation in the field, because it has become an issue. It has become an individual and a household issue. So we experienced that more in the early part of the project, but to a less extent now.
May I also follow? Do you have any champions who are religious leaders?
Yes.
Talk a little bit more about that. How did these religious leaders become champions?
For one, at the community level, the choices, or the indigenous leaders would include actually leaders in the church and leaders in the communities. So their tasks and their roles double up, triple up, and they take on the issue more for the better good, the well-being of the rest of the community and for themselves. So I think the value system of the individual when we implement the PHE project is the one that we need to look at, because it crosses your belief, and I would like to think that I'm a PhD champion. I come from a family of priests and nuns, and it's a serious issue. It's a sensitive issue in my family, but I think there's a lot more of me which is actually happening. So at the community level, you need to build that up as well. I would like to actually address the I have lots of things going on in my mind as you're raising the points, but I'd like to give credit to the PhD community of practice. And I think it is because of the advocacy of this community that's growing, new and emerging, that has provided the new and the very first buy-in in the Philippines. Because if not because of that, including our perseverance and patience and long experience, I would like to think that there's a lot of advocacy that has happened for us to develop that balance project as a mechanism for the buy-in in countries. So I would like to advocate, and I'd like really to continue to say that it's, maybe you don't feel it, but that is something that has benefited a lot of the communities where we work in. And the more advocacy, the more champions, and the more PHE members in the community would really be great. Lessons learned in terms of what worked to build new champions, new PHE, to talk to each other. One experience that I think we discussed a lot was that when you start a project, it's the best time to teach them about PHE integration when they're starting. And we found that in a workshop in Senegal, when we felt that all of these organizations, compared to those organizations wherein we did training of PHE in the middle of their program, that it was easier for them to implement and understand and look at existing framework in their organization and their project as an entry point for PHE. Whether it's a training, whether it's a one-on-one, but when a project is starting, being conceptualized, that's the start of when you start integrating programs. So it's one of the few, but as the south-to-south exchange, wherein communities and leaders and implementers would like to see their counterparts and listen to what the benefits of integration would bring to their programs is actually one of the things that we've seen that work also in this program.
So, Joanne, any thoughts on how you take this up to the ministerial level? That was a question that we had.
Okay, I like that question because we are experiencing at this point in our life in the Philippines that I think it takes time to mature. And there's a lot of interest from the Department of Health in the Philippines and the Department of Environment and Natural Resources. They're looking at their own programs and they have recognized that the PHE approach has benefited the communities. We're in discussions at the national governments on how would we come in. Is it capacity building? Is it implementation? Is it IEC or information dissemination? That we need to start building the capacity of the key staff of these various offices, both environment and health, about the PHE approach. So I think that's patience and programs. I think that goes into how we were able to do it at the national level.
So Janet, Jason has thrown out a question for you about the PHE community. How do you bring on these new players and create this broader PHE community? Any thoughts or reactions?
So I do think this is the big question going forward for the community. I think, in 2008, Balance started. We did several things. Some worked, some didn't work. We had envisioned doing a lot more dialogue among practitioners, like webinars, and using the K4H, the K4Health platform to do a lot more discussions. It didn't quite work out that way. We had a lot of ideas about getting, south to south voices, more champions at conferences. That worked to some degree. So I do think there's a lot more that we could be doing, but I do think there has to be funding behind it. I was just at Stockholm at World Water last week, and somebody came up to me and said, "Oh, you're the one that spams me on the PHE listserv all the time," right? So somebody has to actually be pushing the button, and I did take that as a compliment. Actually, it's not spam, but I do think in terms of the future, and it goes beyond aid too. We have other donors who are interested. We need to definitely be looking at a lot more, I think, bilateral and multilateral interest in the integration space. Do I have the answers for you right now? I don't know. I mean, for me, what I've just kind of looked at from the outside is that East Africa seems to be a real place of fertile ground, and maybe building on some of the strategies that USAID uses already, where they're investing in, southern training institutions to get PHE into those. Something like that might work. I think there's a lot of things to explore. So that's just a couple ideas. Maybe somebody else has others.
And Janet, any thoughts on curriculum development? How do you develop a curriculum when you have these range of issues in different languages and perspectives?
That's not me.
Who is that?
That's like these two.
Okay, those two. Let's hear. Ricky?
Balance actually used a curriculum, and although something that we could have actually done was to look into existing training curricula of the organizations and to look at entry points where PHE can be integrated in their own training curricula. But for the Balance Project produced these training manuals and used them across all of the sites. And it's true that one challenge was getting them translated to the local language, and often there was not funding. There was not funding to do that, and So we could have done better with regard to.
But what about sort of the idea of developing a curriculum that links these fields, population health and environment, and the language of those fields? Is that a technical challenge to bring those issues together? How do you do that?
In fact, the Hope LVB project in Uganda and Kenya is trying to do that now.
Yeah, I would like to comment at that, because that is definitely a need. The balanced curricula had a lot of systems in it. It had a lot of PhD linkages in it, had a lot of family planning in it, had some ecology in it. But there were some other sectors missing. And this is something that the Hope LVB is actually looking to develop. They still need to mature a little bit more before they can get all that together. But the Hope LVB is doing sustainable agriculture. They're doing hygiene. They're doing maternal and child health. They're doing family planning. They're doing conservation. And so it would be nice to have a curriculum that had modules that you could adapt to your own situation. But then one curriculum doesn't always adapt for every country. But there's something needed. I would also like to address Jason's comment, because in a way, I have been thinking about this, Jason, we ran Ricky ragged, in East Africa.
And this is Jason's comment about the best ways to build individual and institutional.
Correct.
Okay,
correct.
go
To
ahead.
build the institutional capacity.
Mm-hmm.
Is that, I think Ricky and I would both agree that you really have to implement before you can train on it. Because, it's good to have your training, but you need to have done it. You need to know what are the pitfalls, what works, what doesn't, what works in your setting, what doesn't work in your setting, et cetera, et cetera. PI has 10 years. 10 years at least of doing PhD, so they've got a dearth of information and experience under their belt. This is just maturing in Africa, and if the Hope LVB project does continue for another 3 or 4 years, they may very well be in that kind of training capacity place to be able to do something like that. I also think that our seed grant recipients, when I listen to them talk about PhD and how they would train on PhD, there needs to be some synergies in country, and how these implementers get together and how they can how they can all train on PhD even though they come from different organizations. It's beyond our project, but it may be something for the future PhD project to consider.
Okay. Questions, comments?
Ricky has a...
Yes, Ricky, please.
Just also on Jason's questions. First, it is important for the organizations to realize that PHE was going to help them achieve their organizational goals. That is, it's not about achieving something else, but rather that PHE was going to, in fact, facilitate their achievement of their own goals. Second is that it was important for the organizations to embrace PHE organizationally and institutionalize them into their existing programs. And that's why we were able to make do with just, with balanced training manuals, because we worked with organizations that had existing programs and projects that served as platforms for integration. And so what the Balance Project did was just to make the links between population health and environment, given that the existing programs had their own curriculum in their own language, and in depending on whether they are agriculture or forests or coastal. So it was just really building on or adding into what was existing, and so that was important and made things easier, especially if they had the additional resources like ongoing training activities. And so we would just build on what they were doing. With regard to how this is going to spread in Africa, I believe there is now enough technical resource available. And the role of networks definitely is going to, networks will play a major role with regard to also helping the other organizations realize how PHE can be beneficial to their organizations, and also bringing together the expertise. And the last point I wanted to make was not to forget the governments to become part of the networks, which is in connection with what John Pilemeyer was asking, whether what worked in the Philippines would also work in East Africa, because in the Philippines, mayors would talk to other mayors. I believe in East Africa through the networks and getting the governments involved as well to become members of the same networks, and that would be the venue for exchange and possibly getting them all on board.
So thank you very much, Ricky. I'd like to just throw out a challenge to the panel, because in his opening remarks, Matt said that he wants us to challenge him. He's revising the PHE strategy in collaboration with others for USAID, and he's looking for new ideas and new opportunities. So my challenge to you is to see if we can come up with a top 10 list format. Can each of you provide 2 key points, recommendations, thoughts based on the last 5 years spent in Balance doing this PHE work that you would recommend Matt and USAID and others in the PHE community and beyond think about? So could each of you give 10 different points? Let's see if we can come up with a top 10 list for Matt and for us to be thinking about moving forward. So Linda said, let me go first. I'll give the first 2. Okay, Linda.
Oh, I don't know if I have 2, but one, definitely find mandates like climate change. And other mandates that people are paying attention to, that we really require a community approach. I think that will help donors. I mean, I'm speaking to the choir, I'm sure, but that will help donors to see it in a more holistic way. The other thing, make resources available. It's not that we were a modestly funded project. Some PHE projects are really remote, and they're dependent upon, the monsoons, the dry season, the harvest seasons, cars breaking down, taking a day to get to the site. Sometimes people having to bicycle for 2 days to get to the site, that sort of thing. So resources are sort of needed because of the remoteness sometimes of some of the sites.
So, there are always opportunity costs associated. I mean, if there's a fixed pot of money that we have now, I mean, the question, yes, make resources available, but how do you determine where to put those resources? Are you saying more on the
I'm saying invest in Africa. I mean, I love the Philippines, of course. So don't forget the Philippines. But also invest in Africa.
Okay.
From our humble experience.
Okay, great. Joanne?
That's a difficult question. But I think seed grants are important. Seed grants, but enough money for them to implement and enough time to gain evidence and to build momentum and to have experience for them to start scaling up. Advocacy should be very much a part, not only at the national, should be at the local level. Because advocacy includes community advocacy, and that's also in part learning what the local governance is, maybe at the village level. And so you build from small things, but then don't forget the top as well, because that will bring in the experience and coming up with a big bang in the end. It would be nice to have both at the same level. I think the other one, which resonates, Linda's, is looking at scaling up on a PHE plus E thing. So looking at beyond the population, health, and environment. You want to look at energy. You want to look at people becoming more resilient. Looking at, in addition to climate change. The other thing is, I like to think that the direction is also urban and not redefining the definition of population, health, and environment into biodiversity, to be limited to biodiversity, but looking at, for example, agriculture and urban. What we've seen in Uganda with VEDCO is that they see the communities see themselves as man of the soil or woman of the soil. So that is actually a different perspective of looking at the need to address the issues for them that love the soil by addressing the population pressures that diminishes their food security. So we have an experience in the Philippines of adding education, adding energy. So it's becoming a bigger perspective. It becomes more complex, but if you come up with like, what is the vision, looking at what do we all want in the end and how do we get there, I think that's how we'll do it.
Janet?
So I have two really selfish ones. Matt, I would really like you to get us back in Madagascar because for me, the biggest personal disappointment on this project is that we are not up here talking about accomplishments in Madagascar. And
why?
Because
why Madagascar is my question.
When I was up here in 2008 talking about what happened under the demonstration phase of AIDS previous, Madagascar had a huge, thriving PHE community. And given we started looking at what was going on there 2008, 2009, but then in July of 2009, we're told we couldn't do anything more because aid was suspending U.S. government assistance beyond humanitarian, which basically meant environment. There's family planning stuff going on, and thanks to Tim and others who care about integration, you know, several organizations were able to do PHE projects with some of the funding that was out there, but we really, really need to reinvigorate that because that is a huge, huge loss. So, and then my other one won't surprise anybody who knows me. We really need to focus on gender and PHE, and we have a lot of opportunity. We have a lot of opportunity, and I know it's close to your heart, so get on that, will you?
Jenna, I have one more for you. I'm going to speak for you because I've heard it for 5 years. Where is the e-money? Yeah, okay. I said that for Janet, right? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, but I also do think, you know, building on a lot of what we're doing with the Africa Biodiversity Collaborative Group, Matt needs to get with the WASH people, needs to get with the nutrition people, climate change, get a lot of friends, and get more diversified funding. Because really, the family planning funds come with a lot of requirements, including all the classes that you have to do and all the training you have to do.
Okay. Thank you for those selfish recommendations. Ricky?
That's so selfish.
I've run out. No, I think we need to do more with the youth. Because I mean, after all, PHE is not about now; it's about the future, and I think we get the youth to get more involved in these programs. The stewardship for environment and health. The other, I guess, if you can facilitate partnerships, especially partnering between organizations that have experience with those that are new and are just beginning, then they would benefit much from these partnerships.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Eden?
Okay, I do agree that we have to bring our interventions to scale, but one of my recommendations is to stop trying to figure out one magic bullet PHE intervention that you can scale up. There's so much push for figuring out what scale up is, but when we do that, most of the time it just gets boiled down to scaling up community-based distribution of family planning commodities. So I think we're doing ourselves a disservice in that. You started out by talking about that what we're doing is an integrated approach. It's important to take an integrated approach, and it's going to look very different in different contexts. And there's not going to, I don't think there is that magical bullet. So my recommendation is stop talking about that. The other one is sort of linking to what Linda said about making resources available. I think that a recommendation to Matt is to continue having a global or a Washington-based funding mechanism like Balanced, because the beauty of Balanced was that we had a core money and then it allowed buy-ins from mission. And I think that the fact that we got the buy-in from the Philippines, the Philippines mission might not have been able to to develop that package in the Philippines. But because you had that mechanism here, they were able to put in those two sources of funding into our mechanism and create that program. So I think the centrally funded mechanism might allow that sort of funding in the future.
Great, thank you. So Matt, find mandates that require community approach, invest in Africa, continue to think about seed grants, think about expanding beyond PHE. Madagascar is also close to your heart, so continue to think of Madagascar. In addition to gender, youth programming, partnerships, contextualizing, taking to scale, not looking for a magic bullet, and continuing to have a DC-based mechanism that allows for buy-in from missions. So this was a really rich, diverse, and I think very honest discussion. So thank you very much. We're going to have a reception now. I'll, as always, encourage you to visit our website at wilsoncenter.org and our blog at newsecuritybeat.org, and to follow us on Facebook and Twitter. We will continue the conversations outside over some really great refreshments. So I know that we didn't get to all of your questions, but there's a lot of opportunity now to continue the dialogue. So thank you very much, and I'll see you outside in the reception. Great. What a good, rich dialogue. Yeah, really. I was doing that, but I think it's okay. So when we go out, I will give it over to you. I'll say a few words and give it over to you. Is that okay? Yeah. Great.
Good point. 2 points.
I know. I was hoping someone would go. Well, you came back in and you got to do it again.